They have to put up with it here. Anna has to come up.
Aloha and welcome to Manifestation Media's live stream interview with Michael Skeeter Pilarski. I'm your host, Butterfly Brielle, and I'm so excited to be tuning in today with Michael to dive deeper into the world of the fairy movement. And he's the founder of the Fairy Congress, an event that's coming up in just a couple weekends. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that from you, Michael. But first, I want to give our audience a little bit more of a background and a little bit more context, and talk about, what's the history of the fairy movement? How did you get involved? And, how did you end up doing this? I'm just very, very fascinated by it.
Well, hi, everybody. It's lovely to talk to you about my friends, the fairies. And to really go back a ways, how I got involved, I was given a book by a woman named Daphne Charters in 1977, way back then. And it ended up becoming 40 years with the fairies, this book that I helped get out. And ever since then, I've been on, you might say the fairies hired me, or I worked for the fairies. And over the years, I must admit I have quite an echo going. I don't know if that's possible to take out. But I've been basically studying fairies ever since. And I've read a lot of books. And I've hung out with a lot of other people that also work with fairies. And so I built up an idea of how does fairies fit into the world today? And so that's what I want to give today to people is an overview of where the fairy movement, if we could call it that, comes from, and where it's going, where it's at today. I'm not getting any sound from you, Brielle.
Yes. So, I'm so blessed to get to join you today. And I'm just so thankful that at this time where there's so much uncertainty on the planet, that these magical creatures, and I think of, I talked to Lindsay on another interview, and I think some of our friends might be tuning in that may have seen that as well. I said to her, I feel like fairies are more than just the fantasy creatures that you see in, a lot of fairy tale books or online and art. I feel like there's more, the fairies are more than just what I think a lot of people think of a fairy as. And I've definitely discovered that connecting to nature and the spirit of nature has been a really powerful grounding force for me during these tumultuous times that we're living through. And so, in addition to hearing a little bit about, your journey, I'd love to just hear from you, like how I can connect to the fairies. I think people are looking to connect right now more than anything. And I feel like the fairies want to connect with us. And that's why that we're being brought here today to talk. So thank you, fairies.
Yes, a lot of people are telling me that the fairy realms are really reaching out to us at this time. There's people, but probably the best way to get a handle on who we're talking about here, who are the fairies, is I'm going to go into a bit of the indigenous worldview. So every indigenous people, tribal people, traditional people in the world talk to the spirits of the lands and the seas where they live. They talk to the plants and the animals. The native people here talk to the salmon. They had salmon ceremonies. The hunters talked to the deer and the animals before they hunted them. The agriculturist had ceremonies to talk to the natural phenomena, the rains, the suns, the phenomena around them, the clouds, the rivers, the mountains. Every indigenous people talked to the beings that lived, that were associated with their landscape. And they said that all life is sentient and all life is sacred. And so they didn't just share the world with a bunch of resources. They shared it with beings that they respected. And so we could say that the plants and the animals and the land around them was alive, and that they communicated with the intelligences behind those beings. So here we're mainly talking about what is often called the nature spirits. Nature spirits, most people realize those are spirits that they can't see, but are working with the plants, the trees, the fish, the waters, etc. And there are small ones and there are large ones. So you could say that there's nature spirits of every size, from the microorganisms scale, the real micro scale, the cellular scale, even all the way up to landscape scale angels. And I just happen to have a book here by a man named Jeffrey Hodson, and I'm just going to show a couple of images here, if I can get it into the screen. And I'm sorry, this is new to me here, so I have to go way here. So a deva of a tree, for instance, or a spirit of a tree, or a spirit of fire, perhaps, or a spirit of air, or spirits above oceans, and spirits of mountains and landscapes. And we call those Davic beings. So in other words, a lot of people say the little ones are nature spirits, or it could be called fairies is a common term, but the landscape scale ones are Davic beings, and they're much larger, and you might say smarter, more powerful. And the indigenous people talked to these beings. If you go back into indigenous people's lores and history and archaeology, every indigenous people talked to these beings, and it wasn't by accident. It's because they could see them, they could communicate with them. And it's interesting that their shamans a lot of times were you might say, the specialists. And so this is a worldview that respects nature and communicates with it. And that worldview, of course, has been under attack. And so what's happened in the world for thousands of years, indigenous people have been attacked by dominant cultures and civilizations, empires, religions, and there's been a lot of genocide against indigenous people. There are so many indigenous peoples that are disappeared from the world today, and there are a lot of the ones that are currently in the world are under attack today. Genocide is still going on, folks, and a lot of these people can't practice their old traditions. A lot of it's, you might say, I'll have more to say about that being lost here in a bit. But I want to relay a story from Ilarion Merkuliev. And Ilarion just gave a talk on Brook Medicine Eagle's seminar on becoming part of the earth. And Ilarion is a Aleut. He's from the Aleutian Islands, what we call the Aleutians Island. He's a Unangan person from the islands at the end of the Aleutian chain. And these indigenous people had the most advanced ocean-going kayaks in the world. They could travel the North Pacific on these kayaks. They're very capable people. And he likes to brag that they're the only people in the world that never wore shoes. And this is way up there, and it's really cold. These people are tough. And at one point, the Russians came over from, reached their coast and their imperialistic advance over there. And they came over to the Aleutian Islands, and they conquered and subjugated these Unangan people. And within 50 years, 80% of them were dead. It was a big genocide. The ones that were left were more or less enslaved. And Ilarion said, The first people they killed when they came were the shamans and the shamans' apprentices. And this is relatively recent time, folks, but this is the colonists and the colonizing forces around the world for millennia have been doing that, killing the shamans and the shamans' apprentices first. The Roman Empire, when they first invented the term superstition, it comes from a Latin superstitia word, and the Roman emperors at the time said were expanding into Europe and were basically out to conquer the Druids. And they said the Druidic religion was not rational. It didn't fit their idea of what religion should be. It was irrational. It was superstitious. And they basically used it in a sense. They went out and put a lot of the Druids to the sword. They killed the shamans. They killed the Druidic priesthood and priestesses and wiped it out. And that was just one of the many instances of a culture that still worked with the land and talked to the spirits being wiped out. And so I just want to point out that the roots of the fairy movement go back. People have been communicating with the fairy realm back into prehistory. I would maybe make a case that ever since humanity came into being, there has been this connection with the fairy realms. And it's only in recent, the materialistic paradigm in the last, a couple hundred years especially, says that there is no God, there is no spirits in the world, everything is just random matter. There is no intelligent design. I had a great little quote here on a definition of animism. So when these peoples when the dominant societies of the world contact these indigenous people and they study them, they say, oh, these people are animists. They have animism. And animism, they say, is they're worshiping nature and that should be stopped and it should be persecuted. This is the missionaries. They said, animism is bad. It should be shut down. And here's a definition of animism I found on the internet. The attribution of a soul to plants, inanimate objects, and natural phenomena. The attribution of a soul to plants, you might say rocks, mountains, inanimate objects, and natural phenomena, clouds, storms, rains, etc. And the other definition here is the belief in a supernatural power that organizes and animates the material universe. In other words, there's a supernatural powers in the universe that organize and animate the world. That is the viewpoint of the fairy movement, I would say, is that these two things, and of course, all religions agree at least on that there's a supernatural force in back of it. So in a sense, some religions, especially Buddhist and Hindu, certain religions actually are, you might say, open to the idea of talking to the natural spirits. There's a lot of ceremonies in Hinduism and Buddhism that relate to the lands where they live. So but the Christians have mostly tried to get rid of these ideas. And so,
hey, let me jump in here, and I wanted
you better.
Yeah, so I wanted to say that what I'm hearing from you is that we went on this journey from this strong, close connection to nature, and not just nature, but the spirits of the elements of nature, the spirit of wind, the spirit of water, the spirit of earth. And we started in a harmony with nature, and in a, not just harmony, but in a strong, close connection spiritually. And over time, that connection and the people who had that connection was eradicated or degraded, whatever you want to, whatever term you want to call it. And so what was really coming to me as I was listening to you was that this new earth, the new era that we're stepping into, the one of the foundational principles of regeneration is to reignite that connection that we have, to find that connection with Earth again. And part of how we can, one of the keys of unlocking that connection is to reconnect with the fairy and earth spirit realm, and that they have not lost that connection, and so maybe they can assist us in finding that new space of, I work with sound therapy, and we talk about harmonic resonance. And so I'm really in the space of finding that harmony, finding that resonance with not just, my fellow man, but all the beings that are sentient, not only on this planet, but in all realms, in the universe, And so I think that's actually the difference, is our study of science now has led us to, like, it's not just reconnection with the earth and harmony with the earth. We need to acknowledge and open our hearts to the fact that there's beings galaxies away that are probably trying to help us. And, looking around me, I'm feeling like I need to accept the help these days. And I need to allow the fairies to help me and ask, So that was one thing I talked with Lindsay about, was the power of our intention and the power that actually just asking for help, asking for the signs. So, and speaking of that, I'm curious what were the first signs that you experienced on your journey? You've had quite the journey with the fairy movement, and obviously with building the Fairy Congress, your event that's coming up. And I'm curious tell me a little story about one of the first signs or experiences of a fairy coming to you or an earth spirit coming to you that was just you couldn't deny it. It was right there, because I just did this event, and this woman, she was talking about spirit leaving us little breadcrumbs, right? So there's little, signs that your prayers are being answered, or that you're not alone, and that the spirits are here to help you. I'd love to learn a little bit more about your journey with that.
Well, there's, I guess one of the things I would say is perhaps the feeling of waves of joy that come through me at times when I'm working on these things. So in a sense, some people see fairies, some people hear fairies, some people feel fairies. And so if you're involved in a spiritual event or meditation or something at any time, and you have waves of joy and peace and love, and just you can feel really good when you're doing these connections. So I think that's one of the signs, is just this feelings you can get. And so it really varies what people are going to get. And you asked earlier, for instance, how can people connect up? And so I would say that we can all go out and talk to the fairies, and we can all go out and talk to the nature spirits, and we can all go out and talk to our landscapes and the beings around us. And so that is part of how you can start this dialogue. If you're not involved already, is you can actually go and start talking to them. And you don't have to actually, a lot of people may not get answers at first or any feelings. But if you keep at it, again, it's, you never know when that sort of thing is going to show up. I know lots of people in my circuits who said, I was just an ordinary worker or housewife or ordinary person, and all of a sudden the fairies appeared to me, or something happened. And so in the twinkling of an eye, something can happen. And so maybe I'll go to this story I was thinking of toward the back here, but I think it's kind of appropriate at this point here. So this is another story from Ilarion Merkuliev, our Unangan elder. And he said he was, at one point, he was requested to attend a ceremony held by Indigenous elders in Manitoba, Canada. So Ilarion is one of the spokesperson in the world today for the Indigenous people. He goes to things like the United Nations. He heads up indigenous elders groups that are international and things like that. So anyway, he went and spent these several days in the ceremonies with these that he was summoned to by these elders. And partway through, that was always in their own language. And at one point, they said, they switched to English and they said, "Hey, we brought you here because we want you to carry a message to the outside world. And here's the message from the elders. We know that people think that they have forgotten their spiritual ways. This is not so. They've been kept for you in the unseen world, waiting for you to wake up in spirit. They've been kept for you." So in a sense, we could say that knowledge of how to work with the landscape and with these beings is not, it's been kept for us. It's there waiting for us to claim it. It's there waiting for us to start experimenting in our own areas. And I
was going to say just beneath the veil, right? Some people talk about the veil, like when the veil is thin, right? That's something you hear on Halloween. It's like the veil between our world and the next, these other realms, is the thinnest on that day. And I think that there is many experiences throughout my life where I've felt that I had some sort of unexplainable mystical experience where I knew that that's what happened. I knew that I was on the other side of the veil, or it was what I was experiencing was going in between the worlds, feeling the difference in the vibration. And what you were talking about earlier, this full body, we call that a full body yes. A girlfriend of mine, Anna Star Makash, I work with her at 1111 Unify. We talk about when we get the full body chills, when we're talking to somebody, it's a sign that we're in alignment and that we're on the path. And I would even go as far to say it's a sign that it's like the fairies are saying, yes, yes, we like, because when I get that full body yes, that's it's my sign that it's not just a yes for my physical body and for me mentally in my mind. It's a yes from spirit. It's a yes from the field, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
right. That's
navigation of these different multi-dimensionality, right, of the world that we're in. Educating people on that, I feel like is part of working with these energies, because they exist beyond what you can see with your physical, with your eyes at times, right? But so I'll tell you a story about one of my first experiences with the fairy. So I was in the forest near a creek. It was a very fairy-like environment, and I was walking along the path, and I saw some butterflies that they were deceased, but there were these butterflies that had been sprinkled. It was like 4 or 5 of them. And it was like they were fully intact butterflies. And there were so many of them. And they were like, it was like a fairy had sprinkled them on the path for me. And that was what came to me when I looked down. I was like, how did these get here? And okay, butterflies can die in nature, but it was not that the butterflies were dead in nature. It was the way they were placed on the path. And it was like what you were just saying. I could feel them. I could feel that was how those little butterflies had gotten there. And it was like an offering to me. It was like a gift. And I knew that whenever I see something like that on the ground and I'm like, I have this experience, I always ask, can I take this? Is this for me? As opposed to just, a lot of people, I think, just grab whatever they see in nature that they want. Oh, I love that flower, I'm going to pick it. It's really important. The fairies are communicating with me. It's really important that you ask and that you make sure that even if you think it's an offering for you or you think it's for you, it's really important that you make sure, because it may be like a fairy altar or maybe like an offering that the fairies had left for, another spirit, spirit of the water, maybe because I was near the river. Anyway, so that was one of my fairy experiences. And of course, I didn't see fairies, but I felt them. I felt that they had left me that gift. And I still have the butterflies to this day. So that's one of my fairy stories. And does that sound like a story does that resonate with you, Michael? Does that sound like anything that you have you ever had an experience similar to that?
Well, fairies leave things in my path all the time. And asking before taking is something that humanity's really got to learn a lot more about. And we have to learn to stop destroying nature and help build it back up. And that's a really a big topic. And I wanted to touch on that at some point, is that if we love nature and we love the earth and the place we call home, and we love the creatures we share it with, and we want it to be healthy, and we want to have a healthy place to live, humans not only have to work with fairies and believe in, work with nature in a spiritual sense, but humans also have to put what I say is an obligation to the earth to replace for what we're using. If you eat, if you breathe, if you drink water, you owe the earth a debt of gratitude, and you should be planting trees and preserving rivers and cleaning up pollution. And so we need to take action in our physical world to make the world healthy, as well as work with the nature intelligences. So you have to go hand in hand. Just to say that I'm just going to pray, in a sense, or meditate and change the world, that's something you can do. But if you don't do anything physical, you're missing part of the boat. So folks, let me really encourage you to do real work for where we live here. And here, yeah.
So I wanted to acknowledge some of our friends tuning in, and just before we get too far in here, we had Jan who said, "Skeeter, this is a good introduction." So he loved your introduction. Sylvia said, "Michael, you are such a joy. Thank you for your nourishment." Thank you, Sylvia, for tuning in with us. And she acknowledged that it's true what's happening with the genocide all over the world. And Mahala said, "I grew up thinking nature had intelligence and a soul, but I thought it might be crazy, so I didn't tell anyone." I think that that's a really important thing to talk about, is about how some people think that they're losing it if they see something and they have these thoughts about what it might be, what might be happening. And I think what I want Mahala to know is, no, you're not crazy. This is the truth. And I think what we've been brainwashed into thinking is not the truth. And then we had one more thing. She said, "I too have a small collections of butterfly that have been gifted to me by fairies." So someone else, I guess this is a common gift maybe to receive from the fairies, is butterflies. And that's part of why I've studied animal medicine so deeply, is because of how much the butterflies have come to me, and the fairies also have come to me quite a bit. So thank you all for those who are tuning in. I just wanted to say thanks to those.
Okay, well, I would just like to say on behalf of the fairies, I said, well, you tell them that we didn't kill those butterflies to put them there, that they had died a natural death, and then we distributed them. But they didn't go out and kill them for you and leave them there.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that. And I think that that's, and we have this person saying, "So much comfort to know that the fairies are waiting to help us." I really think that that's a big piece of this whole conversation with you, that it's like they're here to help us. And so we've talked about a little bit about where the fairy movement has come from, and what's been happening. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about what's happening now with the Fairy Congress, and how the fairies interact with us at the Fairy Congress, as well as where's all this going? What's the future of our relationship with the earth spirits and nature spirits and fairies, and any other beings of light and love that want to come and help us? What do you see for the future, Michael?
Okay, so I'm going to get there, Brielle, but I have a sort of a an order here of this of where we're coming from, and so I'd like to go into that a bit more here, and then answer those questions because they have a place that they'll fit in a little better. So I mentioned the indigenous people, but there's also I'd like to mention that there's a lot of European heritage about fairies, and you find this particularly in England, Ireland, the Celtic countries, but in pre-Christian Europe, there were many, you might say, or even this is even after Christianity, but there were many people that still worked with and believed in and interfaced with the nature spirits and the fairies where they lived. This is, we're talking old Europe here, and they during the great inquisitions and witch hunts, which went on for hundreds of years. There were different ones, and one just one, but a lot of the people of Europe who were involved in working with fairies were burned at the stake. A lot of people were killed. There was a lot of suppression of not indigenous people now, but European cultures. But in spite of this, and so it's not surprising that the idea of talking to fairies died out because you could get you killed. And so a lot of people had to learn to really shut up in those times. But even so, the idea that there are fairies around persisted into England and Ireland and the Celtic countries into the 1900s at any rate. It's still alive today, but it was widely believed by the rural population. There was still a lot of roots, even not that long ago, in a lot of European cultures. And I just wanted to point out that not all people in Christianity were hostile to nature spirits and to nature. Francis of Assisi, Hildegard of Bingen are a couple of the older ones. There's a woman named Flower A. Newhouse, who's a Christian person today. She's now deceased, but she wrote a lot of books on angels and fairies and nature spirits in the mid 1900s or into the 1970s, 80s even. So there are. I didn't want to just badmouth Christianity totally without pointing out that there are, and there's certainly a real renaissance within some of the Christian religions to embrace nature and to take on a more of a stewardship role on the planet now. So that this is a developing thing here. Another train of knowledge about the fairy beings is what we call the Western esoteric traditions. And they don't tell us about that in school. What are the Western esoteric traditions? And it goes way back into Egypt through Greece, Roman times, and they had a lot of times they were called mystery schools at different times. There were different organizations that kept alive the traditions of working with spiritual realms, including nature spirits, and they were largely underground for long periods of time, but they popped up throughout history, and some of those lineages are still around. Robert J. Stewart, for instance, is a teacher today who is carrying on a Western esoteric traditions that's been passed down for generations down the line. So they've been mostly under wraps, but there is this esoteric traditions, and a modern manifestation of this is the Theosophy and the Theosophists, and they got started in the late 1800s. Many of you may recognize some of you listening here will recognize Theosophy, and they started a Theosophical Society. And it was late 1800s into the 1900s. The early 1900s were really their heyday. They were a very large organization, a lot of members, and very active, international, a lot of work in India as well as the US, etc., and England. And some of those writers, and Dora Van Gelder, Jeffrey Hodgson, C.W. Ledbetter. They had a whole series of their authors that talked about the fairy beings and the nature spirit realms. And so that is some of our best books today. So there's a, you might say, a block of knowledge that came to the Theosophists. Another more recent one is the anthroposophy. Rudolf Steiner started the anthroposophy movement, which ended up becoming part of they started biodynamics, they started the Waldorf schools, eurythmy, a form of art and movement. And so, but Rudolf Steiner talked a lot about working with the elementals and with the nature spirits through agriculture, etc. So there's a whole body of knowledge about working with the fairies, nature spirits within the anthroposophy movement in their writings. And then here in modern times, now we're getting closer and closer to today. In the 1970s, Findhorn Foundation got started, or it's the Findhorn and community in Scotland, famous for putting Davis on the map. Peter Tompkins wrote his book, The Secret Life of Plants, and then some sequel books. The Michelle Small Wright started the Perelandra gardens in Virginia and worked out ways of people to work with nature spirits in their gardening. And her books have gone out to thousands of people. And so there was a big, that was sort of like, you might say, a renaissance or the new modern wave of people relating to fairies, Davis, nature spirits. And so that it coincided with what we call the New Age. And so the New Age movement, the fairy movement is part of that, you might say. And over the years, there's been hundreds of books written by these various movements, by these various people, including in recent times. And I've been collecting books on fairies. I have over 200 in my library now. And so there's just huge amounts of information in these books. Yes, you had something, Brielle?
I was just going to say, wow, 200 books. That's incredible. And have you read them all cover to cover?
Oh, heavens, no. I've read many of them cover to cover, and some of them I've had to read several times because some of them are dense, and I'm getting old and forgetful too. So it's interesting. It's like I can enjoy books numbers of times these days.
You know,
but
I want to say something about that, because I have so many books, and I have a few that are like the ones that I like. They're like kind of like my Bible. And one of my Bibles is a book called Animal Speak, and it's a Ted Andrews book on, the different metaphysical and kind of symbology of different animals. And so I feel very connected to nature and to the spirit world and to animals specifically. And I'm curious if I noticed I had my cup says I love dogs today. And I'm curious if the fairies have like favorite animals or other beings that they like talk to and communicate with. Because I notice like my dogs are always like looking at stuff, and I'm always looking around going, what are you looking at? And I'm kind of, people think there's this idea I've had, and that's kind of been, it's an impression some have given me, that being animals like cats and dogs actually have the ability to see, these beings more clearly with their own eyes, than a lot of us. I feel like humans have kind of, it's like we've been telling ourselves certain things aren't real, so they aren't to us. And I feel like if you acknowledge that they are real for you, that's how you maybe open the door to actually being able to see them. I'd love to just hear a little bit more about that. Like, why can some people see these beings visibly with their own eyes, animals, people, and some can't, and how to unlock the sensory the perception, the doors of perception to visibility. I want to see a fairy.
Well, there is a certain amount of belief involved, in the sense if you don't believe in anything spiritual or fairies, etc., you're much less likely to see them than someone that says, I think that maybe it could at least hold it like it's possible. Maybe they haven't experienced it, but they haven't ruled it out. So being open to the idea. And so anybody that has a religion belief of some kind generally believes in spiritual beings, various, depending on your religion. And I was raised Catholic, and so I was raised to believe in Jesus Christ, the Holy Trinity, God, saints, angels, all these beings I couldn't see, Holy Mary. And so I was, in a sense, so anybody that's religious and believes in spiritual beings is, you might say, more primed to believe in a nature spirits, because it's part of the spirit realm. I like to say that fairies are the guardian angels of the plants and animals. And you mentioned that the dogs and cats being able to pick up on and see things we can't. Of course, they can see things outside of our range. We're very conditioned. But we might be able to, the fairies, they don't, I wouldn't say that they have favorites. Every animal, whether dogs, cats, wild buffalo, or elephants, or mink, or whatever, every single type of animal, small and large, has fairy beings or nature spirit beings associated with that. You might say there is the deva of all cats. There may be the deva of all the German shepherds, but there's also fairy beings that work with individual ones. So in a sense, all animals, whether we like them or not, have fairies associated with them, and all plants do. And so they all have, in other words, almost all these fairies that work, they have their favorites. Of course, that's the one that they work with. They kind of get assigned there. It seems like. So so paying attention to your cats and dogs may give some clues. I would say this: I wonder if wild animals actually have even greater perception than dogs and cats, but we don't get to observe wild animals that much as our own animals. So it's.
I was gonna say, so I actually was reading something, and it led me to believe that the goldfinch was like a friend of the fairies, right? So I was reading about the goldfinch in the Ted Andrews Animal Speak book, and it was like, this is the bird that connects to the doorway, right? It's like one of the guardians of the doorway between the worlds. And so I'm curious more. I want to hear more about the doorway, right? It's like, how do we kind of not only open ourselves, but open, like you mentioned, the programming and the conditioning. Are there things that the fairies would help us to, like, are there any activities that we can do? Meditation, listening to certain music, connecting with certain animals. Is there anything we can do to try to kind of help ourselves to maybe deprogram and decondition, so we can put ourselves in a better place of actually being able to connect and see into these realms a little bit more?
Well, I'm going to give you a whole series of things here, but one of them is, if you read some of these books, that if you're not familiar with it, that can help give you some clues and help you out. So I'd say definitely some reading. And I just made a YouTube of my 10 favorite books on fairies. It's up right now. You could find it online through our fairycongress.com website. And so there are some of the best books you can start with. Here's what I like to say. Go out into a wild area that feels special, that hasn't been so damaged by humans, and go and see if you can find a circle of trees in the old growth trees would be nice, but a circle of trees in the forest. Go out on a full moon night and make a fairy altar and burn incense and have chimes and make some pleasant music and meditate and ask to be connected to the fairy realm. So you could do all of these, you might say, things that can help enhance it. But what I really want to encourage people to do is learn to have instantaneous communication wherever they are. In the middle of a crowded high-rise building, can you connect there? Can you? It's helpful for our own mental health and sanity to be able to connect up with our spiritual helpers and spiritual realms in times of need, and then also in times of joy. Spending time in nature is one of the very best things. It's a lot harder to connect with nature spirits in the city. I mean, you can do it. I want to say you should practice it, but the more time in nature and the nicer the nature, that's there's some good tips for people there. And I see our time is going to run out, so I'm just going to mention these couple more points I wanted to make. I'll just have to, but one of the another signs of this fairy movement is there's a lot of fairy festivals. I'm just about to publish an article on fairy festivals and fairy events. And they're just one of the manifestations of, and a lot of them are just cutesy, and they're just, people are costuming up. There's a lot of music, it's vending. They're not really serious much about fairy communication, but still you might say they're at least celebrating the idea of fairies, even if it's as a fantasy. There's always some of the people there that are really for real. So that's another sign of what's going on at these festivals. And the Fairy and Human Relations Congress, which we started, is a gathering of we've been running around 250 people, physical humans, at these events. And we have a lot of workshops and circles. We do a lot of meditations and listening and communication with the fairy realms. And so we are, you might say, the professionals in the fairy circuit. And the people that go to the little fairy festivals are amateurs. Now, that's, of course, stretching it quite a bit. I would get in trouble with some of those fairy festival people saying that. But
be careful what you say. You might want to. The other fairy festivals might come after you.
I know. I might have a lawsuit on my hands.
I was picturing a swarm of flying fairies chasing you.
Oh yeah, okay. They do that sometimes. So, but our gathering, we have a lot of fairies attend. We have a lot of orbs in our photographs. It's very deep, and we're really serious about this communication and cooperation with the fairy realms for the good of the whole earth, and for healing the earth, and for healing humanity. And God knows, Goddess knows that we need all the help we can get. So we're the part of humanity that's working with the fairy realms deliberately for the good of all the rest of the human beings that don't believe in fairies, but do rely on the earth. And so we're trying to work for everybody. And so here we are going to have this online 3-day event, January 15th to 17th, and people from anywhere in the world can join us, and you will learn an awful lot about fairies and how to connect, and and you get to meet and hear some of the best experts on the topic, people that have been doing it for many decades, like David Spangler and Robert J. Stewart and Orion Foxwood, and we have a really great cast of presenters. I just did a survey of past presenters at our fairy congresses. We've done 20 of them. This will be our 21st, and we've had 134 different presenters over the years, some of them many times and some just once. So we are, if you're really serious and want to learn about fairies, you should come to the fairycongress.com website and poke around. And we're just one of them. And I wanted to go back to something you said earlier, that a lot of people, or Mihaela, she made that comment. She didn't talk about her belief in these nature's fairies because she was afraid people would think she was crazy. Most of the people in the world today that see fairies or communicate with them in some way keep their mouths shut. Because in some cultures, people are going to think you're crazy. Some places, they might even lock you up and give you drugs to change your behavior. And in some places, you might even still get killed. There's It is not, all the world is not a safe place for people just to say, yes, I talk to the nature spirit. So there's a lot of people in the world. The movement is so much bigger than we think. I would say there are millions of people. We're counting all the indigenous people that still believe this, that still practice this. We're talking about those people in Europe that still look at those fairy traditions. We're talking about all the people going to the fairy festivals and reading the fairy books of today and going to work. There are millions of peoples in the world in our fairy movement. And I've never heard the term used until your show, Brielle. You're part of fairy history now, because when Lindsay Swope was talking to you the other day on that interview, she mentioned the word fairy movement. And I said, that's the first time I've heard anybody actually say that it's a movement. And I said, well, she said it, so I'm going to run with it. And so
I want to speak to that a little bit, because
go for it.
That ties into, me and why I feel like I was brought here to this earth at this time. Many of the projects I've been involved in, I would consider movements. And what a movement is, we don't use the language as a marketer. We don't use the language, join us, because the idea with the movement is that all of the people that are part of it, not just the people who are putting the event on, but all of the people that come together to create that unified energy field are part of the movement. So there's not this separation between them and us, right? And so I think that that's an important key point at this time, to acknowledge that there isn't this separation. And I've talked a lot in my, some of my writings and different journal entries I've shared about moving from the I to the us, and moving, really, people talk about this oneness, and really understanding that, when you harm yourself, you don't just harm yourself, you harm the entire, fabric, right? And you are just one piece of the puzzle. And the other pieces of the puzzle that are touching you, that are in the field with you, feel that, right? So don't just show up for yourself. Show up for the fairies, and show up for all the nature spirits and all the animals and all the sentient beings, the light beings, that need you, and they need your love. And people are. It's funny you mentioned being locked up for following the fairies and talking about fairies. I feel like a lot of us feel like we're locked up anyway with this virus, and so it's like, I think what would be really magical is, during this time of maybe feeling slightly locked up and locked down, how can we use this time to do a deeper study of nature and evaluation of the reality of the fabric of the universe, which includes all nature spirits and all animals and all people and all loving, beings, and how can we really take this time and use it to develop a stronger connection, so that we become stronger as a society and as a world. And I would love to see more people speaking up about their experiences, speaking out. And we had another comment coming through from someone. She said something like, it was really she felt very validated, and this is what she said. She said she felt very validated by flabbergasted even by the experience that she had. And so she felt validated just hearing other people talk about their experiences with fairies, that was similar to what she experienced. And I just want to say, this person said thank you, and that they have tears of appreciation and inspiration. I also feel that way. I feel like I have so much gratitude for having this experience of getting to talk to you today and getting to learn more about the fairies. And it definitely connects to my intention right now, which is to help spotlight and empower artists. And I think of artists as not just, event producers or visionary artists or painters or singers, but everybody's an artist of their own life. And I think that working with the fairies can help us to become, the fairies are here to help you, and they're here to help you with the expression of the highest frequency and light of your art on the planet. And so ask the fairies for help, and they will come and they will help you. That's kind of what I feel. I feel like they're here with me right now. So
they are. Yeah, you can't escape them. So, at any rate, thank you. Those are wonderful worlds there, Brielle. That really helps sort of like tie it all together at the end. So you said all those inspirational things, so that saves me from having to do it. So, and I know you wanted to end before an hour, so I'm just going to give one more. Here's a quote from a man named Karsten Masai, who's a Swiss man who works a lot with the fairy beings. And he says, "My observations repeatedly confirm that human beings are at all times surrounded by many elemental beings. Wherever we are, they are there to observe us. They live literally everywhere, and they wish for human beings to acquire a sense of their presence." And so I thought that was a great message from the fairies. They actually wish for humans to acquire a sense of their presence, to acknowledge them. And humanity's role in the world is to love the earth and to love all the parts of it, invisible and invisible. And so everybody just follow your heart, stay in love. That's really how we're going to change the world. And you can catch other YouTubes of me out there. So I'm going to say goodbye for now, but thank you, Brielle, for making this possible so I could tell the world about the fairy movement and where it's been, and it's going to help save the world in the sense that if we can work with nature, with the nature spirits, we can pull, as they say, the fat out of the fire. We really need to get on it, folks. I'll see you at the Fairy Congress online, perhaps, or somewhere down the road. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And make sure to check out thefairycongress.com and join us. The Fairy Congress is coming up January 15th, 16th, and 17th. So we look forward. I will be attending this year, as will Skeeter and Lindsay. And I'll also be doing a blog post on manifestationmedia.com with both of my interviews with both Lindsay and Skeeter. And so you can check that out on manifestationmedia.com. It'll be up sometime in the next couple of days, and I'll have a bunch of additional details about the Fairy Congress there. So thank you so much for joining us.